The woman next door whispered something I couldn't ignore, and in that moment, everything changed. The first time he saw her, she was struggling with a cardboard box on the front porch, her hair loosely pinned back, sunlight catching the soft highlights in it. The faint scent of fresh paint and varnish lingered in the air, mixing with the faint aroma of flowers from her small, newly planted garden. He had noticed her moving in earlier that week but hadn't expected the kind of presence that made the hallway feel suddenly smaller, warmer, charged. She was confident in her movements, each step deliberate, but there was a delicate vulnerability in the way she balanced the box, a subtle softness that made him hesitate before knocking. Their eyes met the instant he stepped closer, polite greetings on the tip of his tongue. She smiled, not overly familiar, but in a way that hinted at shared understanding, the kind of smile that made him want to know her story. He offered a hand to help with the box. She hesitated, then allowed it, her fingers brushing his briefly. The contact was fleeting yet electric, a spark of awareness, a quiet acknowledgement that something unspoken had passed between them. He felt the warmth of her hand, a gentle pressure that lingered longer than necessary before she released it, and suddenly, the simple act of helping carried weight. Her voice, soft but confident, filled the small space between them as they talked about trivial things, the layout of her new apartment, the difficulty of carrying boxes up narrow stairs, the weather that had made moving day unexpectedly warm. There was laughter, light and unassuming, a sound that seemed to linger even after the words had ended. He noticed how her eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when she smiled, the subtle tilt of her head, the way she gestured with her hands, fluid and graceful, commanding attention without trying. As he handed over the last of the boxes, their hands brushed again, this time accidental, yet both lingered just a moment too long. He felt the quiet steadiness of her presence, the subtle rhythm of her breathing, the faint perfume that seemed to cling to her without effort. In that shared space, mundane tasks became charged with possibility. His mind replayed her smile, the way her voice softened when she laughed, the glint of mischief that flickered in her gaze, all tiny fragments forming a picture he couldn't quite name yet. Even after the boxes were inside, and the door closed, he found himself pausing on his own porch, staring at the soft glow of light spilling from her windows. There was a pull he didn't understand, a magnetic curiosity that lingered long after their brief encounter. Something about her presence, the combination of self-assured grace and quiet vulnerability, left him unsettled in the best way. It was as if, in a single meeting, he had glimpsed a life that could challenge his own, and he wanted more. That day, a simple act of neighborly help had become the first note of something delicate and intoxicating, a subtle tension that promised a story slowly unfolding. In the ordinary act of lifting a box, brushing hands, and sharing smiles, a quiet connection was formed, one that would grow, layer by layer, into something neither of them could ignore. A few days after helping her move the boxes, he found himself lingering by her door again, drawn by a mix of curiosity and the unshakable pull from that first encounter. She opened the door almost immediately, as if expecting him, holding a small tray of cookies. "I thought you might need a reward for your moving day heroics," she said, her voice warm, playful, with a teasing lilt that made him smile before he even stepped inside. The apartment smelled faintly of vanilla and citrus, a cozy, lived-in warmth that seemed to embrace him. They started with casual conversation, but soon, she had enlisted his help in hanging a picture frame. He handed her the frame, and when their fingers brushed again, she gave a small, deliberate smile. "Careful, don't drop it," she said softly, her tone teasing but not mocking. He noticed the way she leaned slightly closer to reach the nail, the subtle scent of her perfume wrapping around him in delicate waves, the warmth of her presence pressing against his awareness. Each movement, each glance, felt deliberately unhurried, a dance of small gestures that pulled them closer without words. As he steadied the frame, she lightly touched his arm to adjust his grip. The contact was casual, almost accidental, yet it sent a shiver down his spine. He realized how aware he had become of her every movement, the way her fingers lingered just long enough to make a connection, the tilt of her head when she looked at him with a spark of humor in her eyes. She laughed, a soft, genuine sound that made him feel lighter, as if the ordinary act of hanging a picture had transformed into something intimate. She leaned back to admire their work, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Her fingers grazed his shoulder in the process, another fleeting, charged touch, and he felt the warmth lingering where they met. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, there was a quiet understanding between them, a recognition that this connection was something neither of them had expected. She smiled mischievously. "You're better at this than I thought," she said, her voice carrying a playful challenge. He responded with a sheepish grin, aware that the teasing between them was more than just friendly banter. The afternoon stretched into evening as they moved on to other small tasks, organizing bookshelves, stacking kitchenware, finding places for trinkets and memories she'd brought from her old home. Their conversations shifted effortlessly from mundane details to small revelations about themselves, favorite childhood books, songs they could listen to on repeat, moments that shaped who they were. Every shared laugh, every light touch, added another layer to their growing bond. When it was time for him to leave, he felt a pang of reluctance. She stood by the door, her hand brushing his briefly as she waved goodbye, a gesture that lingered in his mind long after he stepped back onto his porch. That afternoon, what began as neighborly help had become a subtle, playful dance of connection, an unspoken promise that each encounter would build on the last. The tension between them was quiet but unmistakable, a slow burn that neither could deny, drawing him further into the warmth of her world. It was late when he found himself walking toward her apartment again, an excuse tucked in his pocket that felt almost trivial compared to the real reason he was drawn there. The hallway was quiet, the faint hum of the street outside seeping through the window, and the soft glow of her living room lamp spilling into the corridor. When she opened the door, she smiled at him with an ease that made the ordinary night feel charged, warm, alive. "Still awake?" she asked, a hint of amusement in her voice, as if she had been expecting him all along. Inside, the apartment was cozy, the dim lighting casting soft shadows across the room. The faint aroma of tea lingered, mingling with the subtle scent of her perfume, delicate and familiar now. They sat on the couch, careful at first, leaving just enough space between them to respect the quiet tension that had been building. Conversation began casually, talk of books, movies, the trivialities of the day, but gradually, the space between words grew comfortable, filled with pauses that spoke more than dialogue ever could. She leaned back, her knee brushing his subtly, almost accidentally, yet he felt it like a deliberate spark. Her voice softened as she spoke about her divorce, about the loneliness that had followed, and he listened with a quiet intensity, drawn in by her honesty. Her hands rested in her lap, and occasionally, one would drift closer, lightly touching his arm as she emphasized the thought. The warmth of her fingers on his skin, the subtle pulse of her presence, made him acutely aware of every detail. The inflection of her voice, the way her hair fell just so over her shoulder, the quiet steadiness of her breath. There were moments when neither spoke at all, just sitting close, sharing the gentle rhythm of the night. He noticed the slight tilt of her head, the curve of her smile when a memory made her laugh softly, and he found himself leaning in, drawn not by necessity, but by the gravity of shared understanding. She noticed, too, their eyes meeting across the small distance, and a flicker of something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement that this connection, fragile and tentative, was growing into something deeper. As the evening lingered, she reached for a blanket, draping it over their shoulders as they shifted closer to look at a book of photographs she had found. The brush of her hand against his arm, the warmth radiating from her shoulder pressing gently against his own, the scent of her hair mingling with the soft glow of the lamp, every detail became magnified in the quiet intimacy of the night. He realized how natural it felt to be near her, how the conversation, the touches, the laughter, had begun to erode the careful boundaries he had once maintained. When he finally rose to leave, the goodbye lingered longer than necessary. Her hand brushed his briefly, the contact light but charged with everything unspoken between them. He stepped back into the hallway, carrying with him the memory of the warmth, the laughter, and the gentle closeness that had made a late-night visit feel like stepping into a different world, one where connection mattered more than time, and every moment was quietly significant. It was a quiet evening when she invited him over again, ostensibly to help her move a few more boxes, but the air between them carried something more, an unspoken anticipation that made each step toward her apartment feel charged. The moment he entered, she was standing near the window, the soft glow of streetlights painting her silhouette in warm amber. She looked at him with that same mischievous glint in her eyes that had first caught his attention, and before he could speak, she leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Let's wake the neighbors." The words were playful, teasing, yet they carried an electricity that made his pulse quicken. She moved closer, brushing past him lightly, the warmth of her body pressing subtly against his as they reached for the same box. Her fingers grazed his hand, lingering just enough to make him aware of the connection, yet careful not to overstep. The scent of her perfume, a delicate mix of vanilla and something floral, wrapped around him like a soft invitation. Each small touch, each accidental brush of hands or shoulders, felt deliberate in its intimacy, a language spoken without words. She set the box down and turned toward him, her eyes locking with his in a way that made him suddenly conscious of every detail: the curve of her smile, the softness of her gaze, the quiet confidence she exuded even in casual movements. Her hair fell loosely around her face, and she reached up to tuck a strand behind her ear, her fingers brushing his arm as if by accident. He felt a warmth spread through him, a fluttering that had nothing to do with the task at hand, and everything to do with the unspoken tension simmering between them. For a moment they stood in silence, both aware of the electricity in the air. Then she laughed softly, a sound that was both intimate and teasing, and nudged him gently with her shoulder. "You're too serious," she whispered, her voice low and inviting. He tried to respond, but words failed him, replaced by the awareness of her presence, the heat of her hand lingering near his, the subtle movement of her body close to his, the rhythm of her breathing that matched his own in a quiet, mesmerizing sync. They moved together through the small tasks of the evening, yet every action was layered with subtle intimacy. Her hand would lightly touch his arm when pointing something out, or brush against his shoulder as they reached for an object. Each contact was fleeting yet charged, leaving a trail of awareness that neither could ignore. The playful whisper, "Let's wake the neighbors," became a mantra of sorts, a signal of their shared mischief and the tension that had been growing between them for days. When the night began to wind down, he realized that ordinary tasks had been transformed into moments of closeness and shared thrill. Every brush of her hand, every whispered word, every lingering glance had created a space where they could explore connection without fear or rush. He left her apartment with his heart still racing, the memory of her whispers and playful touches etched into his mind, knowing that their slow-burn connection had just taken a thrilling step forward. After that evening, he found himself lingering in thought long after leaving her apartment. Each brush of her hand, each whispered word, replayed vividly in his mind. The warmth of her touch, the sparkle in her eyes, the soft teasing of her voice, all of it seemed to haunt him in the quiet moments of his day. He wondered if she felt the same pull he did, or if it was just his imagination turning ordinary gestures into something significant. The thought of crossing unspoken boundaries filled him with a mixture of excitement and restraint. He walked through his apartment, tracing the memory of her laughter and the scent of her perfume that had somehow lingered in his senses. It wasn't just attraction, it was the complexity of her, the way she carried herself with confidence and subtle vulnerability, the depth behind her playful glances, the quiet strength that seemed to anchor her even in the smallest gestures. He realized the age difference, though unspoken, weighed on him more than he had anticipated. How could he, a man barely in his mid-20s, navigate feelings for someone whose life experiences were layered and intricate? Every small interaction with her became a catalyst for reflection. He noticed himself hesitating before knocking on her door, rehearsing words in his mind, wondering if he was overstepping by wanting more than friendship. He found himself analyzing the brief touches, the brush of fingers, the leaning closer during conversation, trying to decide whether they were playful or meaningful. And yet, the more he reflected, the more he realized he didn't want to overanalyze or suppress what he felt. There was a magnetic pull he couldn't ignore, a quiet need to understand her world and let her understand his. He also grappled with social perception. Friends might not understand the attraction to someone older, someone who had a history, a divorce, a life already partly lived. And yet, he felt an almost irresistible clarity. She made him feel seen in a way no one else had. Her subtle affection, the way she listened without judgment, the ease with which she shared her vulnerabilities, it all drew him in deeper, demanding honesty from him that he hadn't extended to anyone else. At night, he would lie awake recalling her gestures, the slight brush of her hand on his arm, the way her eyes lingered on him when she laughed, the whispered tease of, "Let's wake the neighbors," echoing in his mind. Each memory left him restless, his emotions a mix of longing, hesitation, and anticipation. He realized that he was no longer simply curious. He was invested, emotionally and quietly, in ways that felt both thrilling and frightening. By the end of the week, he knew he had to confront the tension within himself, to acknowledge the attraction and desire without letting fear or doubt dictate his actions. The slow burn between them had shifted from playful curiosity to something more profound, a quiet emotional connection that demanded reflection, patience, and care. And in that realization, he understood, the path forward would require courage, honesty, and a willingness to embrace the intimacy growing between them, one careful, deliberate moment at a time. The evening came softly, the kind of quiet night where the world outside seemed to pause, leaving only the two of them in a shared bubble of anticipation. He had stopped by her apartment, ostensibly to return a book he had borrowed, but both of them knew it was more than that. The air smelled faintly of rain, a soft petrichor drifting through the open window, mixing with the subtle warmth of her presence. She greeted him with a smile that made his chest tighten, the kind of smile that carried both playfulness and vulnerability, a hint of something unspoken. They settled near the window, watching as raindrops traced slow paths down the glass. The soft patter on the roof provided a quiet rhythm that mirrored the tension between them, steady and insistent. Their shoulders brushed lightly as they sat closer than necessary, the proximity charged yet gentle. She glanced at him, her eyes reflecting a depth of emotion he had only glimpsed before, a combination of curiosity, longing, and something tender he couldn't yet name. For a moment neither spoke. The silence was heavy, but comfortable, filled with shared awareness. He noticed the subtle movements of her hands as they rested on her lap, the delicate way she adjusted her position, the faint warmth radiating from her, as she leaned just slightly toward him. Every small gesture, every nuanced shift in posture, carried meaning, creating a language that existed only between them. Then she spoke, her voice low and intimate. "I've never felt this comfortable with anyone in a long time," she confessed, her gaze steady on his. The words struck him with quiet force, resonating with the thoughts he had been wrestling with for days. He realized, in that moment, that the tension they had been dancing around was no longer one-sided. His own heart responded with clarity. He had been drawn to her for more than weeks, not simply by curiosity or playfulness, but by the genuine connection that had grown steadily, quietly, between them. He reached out almost instinctively, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, feeling the warmth of her skin under his fingers. She didn't pull away. Instead, her eyes softened, and her hand found his, fingers curling lightly around his own. The touch was electric, yet tender, a gentle acknowledgement of the bond they had been nurturing. He felt the rhythm of her heartbeat against his own, steady and reassuring, a silent confirmation that this connection was mutual, real. They stayed like that for some time, letting the quiet intimacy wash over them. Every laugh, every shared glance, every subtle brush of hands added to the growing certainty that they had found something rare, a slow, deliberate understanding of each other that went beyond attraction, beyond flirtation, into genuine emotional intimacy. The age difference, the social hesitations, the unspoken fears, all of it melted away in the warmth of their shared moment. By the end of the evening, there was no need for words to explain what had shifted. In the soft glow of the lamp, in the gentle brush of her fingers against his, in the quiet laughter and the lingering looks, they had recognized it together, a slow-burning, meaningful connection, both thrilling and tender, built carefully over time and now fully acknowledged. The next evening, The tension that had built between them over weeks of small encounters and stolen moments gave way to a calm, effortless warmth. He found himself walking to her apartment not out of obligation or curiosity, but because he genuinely wanted to be near her. The air carried the faint scent of rain from the day before, mingling with the aroma of the jasmine she kept in a small vase by the window. When she opened the door, her smile greeted him like sunlight breaking through clouds, soft and reassuring. Inside, the apartment felt like a sanctuary, a space where laughter, warmth, and quiet intimacy could flourish. She had prepared tea, and the gentle clink of mugs as they sat together on the couch created a rhythm that matched the steady comfort of being in each other's presence. Their shoulders brushed lightly as they moved closer to share a blanket, the small contact both soothing and meaningful. He noticed the warmth radiating from her, the faint scent of her perfume mingling with the herbal tea, and felt a deep sense of belonging, a rare connection he had never experienced before. Conversation flowed easily, unburdened by tension. They spoke of small dreams, favorite memories, and the simple pleasures of life. Her laughter was light and melodic, echoing softly in the room, and he found himself drawn to it again and again. Every glance carried unspoken affection, every gentle touch, her hand brushing his when she reached for a mug, his fingers lightly resting on her shoulder as he handed her a book, became a shared language of care and closeness. At one point, she leaned back against the couch, her head resting lightly near his shoulder. He instinctively shifted closer, feeling the warmth of her body and the subtle rise and fall of her breathing. There was no rush, no urgency, only the quiet comfort of being near someone who understood him in ways few had. She turned her head slightly, their eyes meeting, and a soft smile played across her lips. Without words, they shared a mutual acknowledgement of the bond that had deepened over time, a connection built on trust, subtle affection, and shared moments of vulnerability. Later, as they prepared to settle for the night, he helped her fold a blanket, and their hands met again, lingering just long enough to communicate the care they felt for one another. She lightly brushed her hair back, and the gesture, simple as it was, felt intimate, tender, and completely natural. The soft glow of the lamp, the faint hum of the night outside, and the warmth of their closeness created a sense of calm contentment, a feeling of being exactly where they belonged. By the time he left, there was a sense of quiet fulfillment. Their connection had grown from curiosity to playful flirtation, then to emotional intimacy, and finally into a gentle, steady affection that felt enduring and real. The playful whispers, the accidental touches, the shared smiles, all had led to this calm, warm resolution. He walked home with a lightness in his chest, a smile lingering on his lips, knowing that their bond was not fleeting. It was a slow-burn connection that had matured into something profound, comforting, and beautifully mutual, leaving the audience with the satisfaction of a story fully realized and emotionally complete.